Hello there, welcome to my review of the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes, Series 1, Episode 4, Boscombe Valley Mystery. The episode begins with a little girl stumbling upon two men arguing in the woods. She runs from them and we cut to Watson on holiday, fishing nearby, before he is discovered by Holmes, who is there on a case.
A farmer called McCarthy, Australian by birth, met his death by a mere at the bottom of his farm. It seemed to establish a very serious case against the son of the murdered man.
They journey to the Boscombe Valley where the murder took place. Holmes has been engaged by Alice Turner, whose father is also Australian and who rented his land to the murdered man, William McCarthy. Alice has been lifelong friends with the accused man, James McCarthy. He claims he was walking away from his father when he heard a scream. When he returned, he found his father as we saw him. Before he died, he said something to James about a rat. It's a nice change of pace for the opening, having Holmes and Watson nearby and us learning all the information as they do. As much as I enjoy the now traditional teaser prologue, this is a fun novelty. I'm not sure we needed the scene of the two men arguing before we meet Holmes and Watson, and it might have flowed better had that been part of the flashback, and the show had opened with Watson fishing. Holmes doesn't believe the official version of events entirely makes sense, as it wraps everything up a little too neatly, but he feels James's behaviour is incongruous with the official story. This is seconded by Alice Turner when she meets with Holmes, although her belief in James's innocence is based on how well she knows his character.
I know that James didn't do it. I know it. And I want you to start your work knowing it too. Never let yourself doubt upon that point.
She believes the argument he had with his father was over his reticence to marry Alice, despite her loving him and believing James loves her. Alice's father is also against the match for reasons unknown to Alice. There's a definite risk of this story falling into melodrama with the star-crossed lovers and feuding households, and while this information is important, it is a little confusing. William McCarthy wanted James to marry Alice. Her father John didn't want the marriage to happen, and it seems neither did James, but Alice was willing and believes that James loved her too. Holmes goes to see James and he tells her the same story he told the coroner's court. He also confirms he loves Alice but cannot marry her because he is already married.
In a fit of drunken madness, I went through a form of marriage in a register office to a woman much older than I was.
But has discovered since he was imprisoned that she was already married, so his wedding to her is now voided. This was at a time when marriage was easy, but divorce was almost impossible and deeply socially unacceptable. Holmes then examines the murder scene and finds traces of a third man, and the murder weapon. Sherlock is able to give Inspector Somerby and Watson a description of the murderer, which they are astounded by, but Somerby says he can't act on such a description.
I cannot undertake to go all around the country looking for a left-handed gentleman with a gambit leg. As to become the laughingstock of Cheshire.
Holmes parts company with him at this point and explains to Watson that James did not hear his father say a rat, but Ballarat, a city in Australia. At that moment, John Turner arrives at Holmes and Watson's lodgings, and he is the man Holmes described. He is the murderer. Caught by Holmes, he tells his story. He and McCarthy were highwaymen in Australia, and after a big score and a big price put on their head, Turner fled to Britain and set himself up honestly. marrying and then having a daughter, Alice. All was well until McCarthy arrived with nothing but the shirt on his back and his son James. Blackmailing Turner to set him up in business, Turner could take no more when McCarthy demanded Alice and James wed. Turner was dying, and in a final act he decided to end McCarthy's influence on his family, so killed him. He says he would tell all if it looked as if James would be convicted, and Holmes believes him, and allows him to die on his own terms, but says he will use Turner's confession if James is not released. We end with James being returned to Alice, both now free to live their lives on their own terms, together. On the surface, this is a fairly simple tale, although with some complex relationships at work, and I'm not entirely sure it manages to properly convey exactly how those relationships interconnect. By the end, it's clear once the mystery is solved, but in the moment it's a little confusing. What really elevates this from a basic mystery, though, is some of the themes at work. John Turner not only resents McCarthy for his hold over him, but extends this animosity to James, which causes the central conflict that leads to the murder, the sins of the father. Turner would not have been happy about James and Alice marrying, but would have been more likely to accept it if it were on their own terms. But McCarthy was using it as an attempt to exert more control over Turner. Had he not killed McCarthy, McCarthy would have essentially gained control over everything Turner held dear, including Alice. The morality of that is highly questionable, and it would have been nice to see just how evil McCarthy was to get a better sense of that. But that is the central motive, and a more nuanced one than simply killing a blackmailer. Also, the social implications of Victorian society are heavily at play here, with James unable to simply get a divorce without it reflecting badly on him and Alice if they were to then marry. I'm not sure Holmes was right to let natural justice prevail in this case, as Turner had been a pretty despicable criminal in Australia, and, other than raise his social standing, had done nothing to atone for it in Britain. But I can go some way to understand it. I think there's a slightly better story in there than the one we're given, and with a few minor changes I think it could have flowed better. But it's still an excellent story with plenty of layers, so for me this is a 4 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.